recommending this bill to the House.
The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, it's amazing how you can misuse the English language. The word flexibility that the member who's just resumed his seat used actually translates to cutting $138 million out of ensuring access to justice for those that are least able to pay for it. And he calls it flexibility. It has tones of 1984. It's Orwellian. Mr Speaker, this bill was such a bad bill that was voted for by the National Cabinet in 2011, then supported by the National Party caucus, and then introduced to the House that year with the unanimous support of National. And it comes to the House now with greater deletions than any bill that I've seen in recent times, because the National Party caucus and Cabinet got it so absolutely wrong. They're prepared to be shameless, but not so shameless that they could sustain a bill that fundamentally denies the right of justice to so many New Zealanders. Mr Speaker, it's not simply the minority report in the report back of this bill that condemns the bill. It's the majority commentary from the Select Committee that constitutes in this report back a 9-page apology for getting it absolutely wrong. Let me give you an example. This is on tightening the means test for people defending themselves against criminal charges. And the committee, the majority, says that this would restrict access to justice too severely and breach a person's right to a fair trial. How much more basic a breach of fundamental human rights could that admission actually own up to? This bill, designed to save money, taking it out of the hides of those least able to look after themselves, constituted a fundamental breach of justice. And the member who just resumed his seat described that as flexibility. Mr Speaker, on and on it goes. You know, in the original bill, they were even going to means test people under the protection of the Personal and Property Rights Act. You know who that means? It means mentally disabled people who have no ability to look after their own rights. And of course, when the submitters came to the Select Committee, the National Party members bowed their heads in shame and knew that they had to cut that out of the bill. You know what else it was going to do? It was going to set up a means test on disposable capital. And does the member, Mr Foster Bell, know what that involved? They were going to means test things like the family refrigerator and washing machine. They were going to means test the basic tools of trade of people that relied on those tools to go out and work. And most shamefully, if you were in a wheelchair, they were going to means test the value of the wheelchair. That's how miserable this government was. Why did every member of that National Caucus come into this chamber and vote for a bill that looked like that? No concept of social justice, no concept of the understanding that the decency of any society is based on whether you accord those people the right to justice. Right. You know, they also had an approval framework that they were going to change for court-appointed lawyers representing children, and they were going to charge foster parents for parenting orders that they had to get from court. The Select Committee, to be fair to the Select Committee, said they could find no justification at all for changing a framework that was working well. I want to ask the Minister, why was it that her Cabinet got it so wrong that they recommended things that the Select Committee threw out, including her own backbenchers on that Select Committee? How did they get it so wrong? Why were they so mean-minded that they were going to take it out on the hides of people not capable of protecting themselves? You know what else the report back says? it says that this would increase the number of self-represented litigants. Well, as Leanne Dalzell said, that meant actually having no representation at all. People who don't understand the principles of justice, who don't understand the court procedures, they were going to be denied the right to proper legal advice, so they understood what the principles of justice required and understood the procedures that they were going through in court. In the end, does that save money? No, it costs money because it takes extra court time, because the judge has to go through at each step and tell the person that's supposedly representing themselves what the court requires of those people. Mr. Speaker, you know, one of the other things, and they haven't even changed this, is they said in this bill that if you had debts, previous legal aid debts that you weren't able to meet, you were going to be denied legal aid. Well, you know, if a person was sitting on their hands and sitting on their bank account and simply refusing to pay the debts, fair enough. But I guarantee to this House that most of the people who had legal aid debts had those debts because they didn't have the means to pay that money back. And any decent parent, when it came between putting shoes on the feet of their kids and clothes on their back, or repaying a legal aid bill, would put the priority on their own kids. So here we have this government saying you're already so poor and downtrodden that you can't repay the bill. Now we'll deny you legal aid because you're not able to afford to repay the bill. And what's more, we'll charge you interest on the arrears. You know, I think I can understand why a cabinet of 20 people, each on at least $250,000 a year, have so lost touch with the situation of the average working New Zealander that they can't understand that a low-income New Zealander can't afford the thousands of dollars or the tens of thousands of dollars that legal bills require. But I want to remind Mrs. Collins and her cabinet colleagues of what the regulatory impact statement says about legal aid. And this is what it says. The purpose of legal aid is to provide access to justice by providing legal services to people of insufficient means. You know, this bill isn't that, the situation with legal aid isn't that generous. I think the means test for a single person is $21,000. That is below the minimum wage. So the single person on a minimum wage can't get access to assistance under this bill. If you've got family dependents, it's a little bit more generous as a threshold. It's about $51,000. But the regulatory impact analysis goes on to say this about legal aid. It contributes to fairer outcomes by ensuring that parties with unequal financial resources have equal access to justice. You know, at the moment, the justice system too often works only in the interests of the wealthy. The wealthy person that can afford to go out and pay the QC will get off the charges, sometimes without regard to the merit of their case. The low-income person won't be able to afford anyone to represent them at all unless you're so ground down you're right at the bottom of the heap. How, Mr. Foster-Bell, can that mean access to justice? How can that mean fairness in the system? Why is it fair that the wealthy person can escape, or the wealthy person can push down the person that they may be up against in court who doesn't have resources and doesn't even have representation? That is fundamentally unfair. It's fundamentally wrong. That's why this party is opposing the bill. The other thing the regulatory impact statement says is that legal aid helps underpin confidence in the justice system. Well, this bill undermines confidence in the justice system because it puts cost-cutting ahead of the interests of justice. You know, it's not simply that the government can't afford it. The government can afford to give tax cuts to the most wealthy. John Key, the Prime Minister, several $100,000 a year in tax cuts, but that is on the backs of the people who lose access to legal aid, who can't afford to be represented in court. And I ask this government where their priorities lie. I ask this government where their sense of justice is.
Sorry to
this
interrupt
bill
the honourable
lacks
member.
it.
Ms. Time has expired. I call Claudette Howitt.
Can I just say, Mr Speaker, that was such a wonderfully impassioned call.